Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri and welcome to another illustration video tutorial. For this week's tutorial, I actually got the special request to draw a character with electricity running through them. So for this reason, I really wanted to show a really strong pose, so I actually did quite a few renditions before I actually settled on this version of the pose. So I was trying to get a little bit of foreshortening, not too much, and I was really trying to show the character having his chest protruding more as the energy is coursing through him. So the main focus for this, because I haven't done it in a while, was to actually really push the dynamic pose in this character so that it reads really clearly and also have a very strong emotion going with this character. So that was the main focus in this week's tutorial. Now, as you can see, I actually roughed out the basic portions initially in grayscale, but I was using the hard brush exclusively for that portion, and the main reason why I was doing that was so that I didn't tighten up my drawing too much. Once I had that information down, I had the general elements that I was thinking about including in the costume design, then I actually worked out the actual anatomy for the character. Now I did want this to have more detail than in some of my previous ones, because I am trying to work towards a more detailed final image. So for this reason, I was obviously looking at my reference and trying to push as much detail while not overdoing it at the same time. So it's a very hard thing to get initially, is to get that good in between of having not too much detail but just enough detail so that it really helps bring forth the drawing. So although I had my initial sketch behind this, as you can see it's behind it, but I'm actually not following it 100%. The reason for that is because I really want to push the pose as I'm working, which is why I'm worried more about the anatomy than anything else. Because if I have a strong anatomy, I have a strong pose, then any elements that I add to this character will just be emphasized, it'll look better, as long as the basics have been done properly. So I do spend a lot of time on this leg in particular because there's a lot of complicated elements going through this element, so I do have to showcase it accurately. So as I'm doing this portion, I actually have some of my life drawing reference material in front of me, and I just skipped over to a later portion just because it did take quite a long time for me to get something that I liked and a pose that I liked for the overall anatomy of that leg. Now, once this basic portion is done, I will actually start working on the clothing and plotting out the final pose for that other leg. Now, I did start off with one pose, but I still didn't like how it was, so I tweaked it more until I got something that worked a lot better. So as you can see, I actually used the warp tool briefly to actually skew the chest area to protrude it more and push that dynamic curve inside the character's body. So final tweaks going on in the foot, as you can see. I've just started on the actual clothing elements for this character. Now I just had an initial loose idea for these clothing elements, but the key thing is I still need to show proper structure within the clothing elements. So I'm really working out how I'm actually going to do that while portraying the elements that I want to portray. So I just roughed out really quickly, fleshing it out a little bit more, that initial sketch, and now I'm actually starting to render out the clothing. Now the clothing actually don't normally take all that long to do because you can actually just insinuate much more of the information than you can with the anatomy. So you can actually also fudge parts of it to fit your needs. Now, as you can see, I didn't like quite what I had. I didn't find that the clothing was following the contours of the body enough, so I just painted it all in white and repainted on top of it. Something I'll do quite often, actually, when it comes to clothing design if I'm not satisfied with the end result. Just adding the belt portion here, as you can see, making sure to add some shadows here and there so that it looks like it's actually overlapping on the body as it's wrapping around it. Still tweaking the anatomy Still not 100% satisfied with what I have, so I'm trying to push some of the detail while trying to recede other portions as well. Now I'm working on the foot. For this back leg, I actually do have some small amount of armor and clothing on it, but it's not all that much. I'm just working on the arms now. Now, because I already fully fleshed out the information that I was going to include for the arm and anatomy, I actually had a really good idea of how I was actually going to paint this by this point. Because as I was working on other portions of the character, I was thinking about throughout the entire character design how I was going to go about rendering it. So by the time I actually came to the arms, I actually had a fairly good idea of how I was actually going to go rendering those portions. Blocking in the neck right now. As you can see, I'm keeping everything really rough, adding some highlights wherever I need to, just to make sure that the character pops a little bit. Also tweaking some of the proportions. The leg wasn't big enough considering the character's torso, so I modified that slightly. And I'm just adding some of the clothing elements that are actually dangling in the wind at the moment. And I'm adding the skulls on his belt. And the skulls are not the focal point, so I'm not adding as much detail in that area. Working on the highlights a bit more. I didn't find that there was a sharp enough highlight in most areas, so I just went in and added that. And I'm just adding some details into the pant cloth, making sure to wrap it around the shapes. Tweaking some additional anatomy in the shoulders and chest. Those shapes need to read correctly before I can move on to the hands. And I'm just blocking in the general shapes of the hands. Most of the information for the hands will not be seen once I add the electrical elements. So for this reason, I just have to keep it really basic because you actually won't see most of that information once it's done. Now I've just started working on the head. As you can see, when I start working on the head, I add some basic shapes, and I actually try to figure out the basic lighting that I'll have and make sure that my proportions are correct before I move on to any more details. And I'll tweak throughout the painting of this, the proportions as I go, until I come up with something that fits what I need. Now I did want this character to look fairly robust, so he has strong cheekbones and a chin, which is more typical of a heroic character. I'm just working on the body armor. I don't end up keeping the shoulder armor on one of the sides. I actually end up removing it and redrawing both of them actually because I just didn't like the way the design was going, so I just tweaked it and made it actually just on the one arm instead. I'm adding some cloth elements, and there's the shoulder armor that I'm re-adding in. And I'm modifying the elements to actually look a little bit different than what I initially had. So they actually interweave right into the cloth that he's wearing, his sash. Making sure that the shadows actually show that it's actually overlapping on his chest. And as you can see, I haven't started on the eyes yet. The reason why is because he's supposed to be made out of electricity and it should be emanating from him. I need to actually show the light source actually coming from his eyes to really show that it's actually coming from his core. So I just added a color layer to this, and I applied a mask to it so that I can actually just plot in the areas that I want to have with the skin tones. And once I had that, then I actually started painting by sampling the information I already had and adding some additional colors into the character to give him more of a peachy look and look a little bit more realistic with more variations in the color. So just added in the color for his pants. I'm keeping all the information still really basic because I don't want it to take away from the lighting that I will be adding. So these are all complementary colors that I'm actually choosing for this character. Also tying in that blue light that's emanating from his hands into his clothing as well. It's very important that I do that, because if I don't do that, then it tends to look too much like a separate object, and that's definitely something I want to avoid. Adding some additional lights coming out of his eyes. And some reflected light into some of the darker recesses, just to help bring out the contrasts in those areas. So I've just added another color layer, but in behind the character. The reason for that is to actually help bring out the character more. And I've also added some tattoos that are actually glowing in his skin as well. If you want to have your say on what's drawn for next week's video tutorial, or have some additional questions about my drawing process, please leave a comment below. I will take the feedback you guys give me and try to answer your questions while working on next week's painting. If you want to see some of my previous works, please feel free to check out the annotations on the side of this video, or visit my channel for the full playlists. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.